Tell me more about the global hyperinflationary type event. What would that look like, or what would you be looking for to say, yes, it's happening now?
Well, first of all, I think we're kind of in the early innings of it. Of course, it's not going to be an overnight thing. It's more likely to kind of also come sort of in these waves of increasing and reducing inflation. But we're already seeing inflation at like 42-year highs. And personally, kind of the official government statistics that we're seeing in the world, I think those are further sort of artificially lowered. I think just by looking at the food prices and the real estate prices that I myself am experiencing, I would say things are kind of slowly getting out of control. Now, people think that it's because of supply side reasons. I still think that the majority driver of that is sort of the insanely aggressive monetary expansion that we've seen sort of spring 2020 onward. But essentially, there's a kind of one of the less spoken about debates in the Bitcoin world is whether the transition from fiat to crypto, whether it's going to be a peaceful one, and there's definitely a path for that as well, or it's going to be more turbulent. Now, in the last 3 or 4 months, we're already seeing sort of some civil unrest around the world, Albania, Sri Lanka, Tunisia, Kosovo, Serbia, etc. And in my opinion, sort of, if you look at history, rising sort of bread and energy prices have always been the biggest and the most frequent sort of causer of any kind of upheaval or unrest, right? So definitely just something to consider, definitely something to think about as we sort of move forward in this age of rapid change, I would say.
Talk to me about the central banks around the world and their role through market intervention in creating some of these scenarios versus is it external shocks and external event developments that they're simply trying to respond to, and you can't really lay fault or blame with the central banks for either the 40-year high of inflation that many countries are seeing or things like a potential recession, which I would argue is a recession in the United States.
So I believe that a fractional reserve-based banking system cannot survive without intermittent interventions of central banks into the economy. As I'm sure many other guests on your podcasts have alluded to in the past, this creates all kinds of distortions when it comes to sort of the correct pricing of goods. More importantly, and something that's less talked about, is I believe that the government intervention in the currency markets, it makes inflation a lot higher than it has to be, which in turn, I believe is kind of the primary cause of mental health issues, stress, anxiety, because essentially it forces you at the margin to prioritize short-term projects over long-term projects. And because of that, people essentially, not just financially, but also psychologically are essentially like living week to week, if not day to day. And that creates a lot of discomfort in people's minds, right? And I think that this is like one of the 12, 13 things that is less discussed and something that hopefully will change for the better once we kind of move to a sounder system in the coming years.
You've mentioned a couple of times that transition could be peaceful or it could be a little bit more turbulent. What is your kind of description of both of those scenarios? What does the peaceful transition look like? Is it just people start buying something like Bitcoin and over time the percentage increases and then everyone starts using that? And then also, what does the turbulent time look like in your opinion, given the facts and information that we have today?
So I guess I kind of described a similar metaphor a few years back, but effectively both fiat and Bitcoin are just two balloons, right? And with every boom and bust cycle that we have in Bitcoin, effectively the peak of each of the bull cycles is essentially an attention wave, right? And with each of those attention waves, usually the majority of new participants of each generation in Bitcoin cycles predominantly comes at the top. And it's designed to be that way, right? Because with the top comes the greatest amount of hype, news, marketing, attention, right? And each of these sort of heartbeats, so to speak, brings more people from the fiat balloon into the Bitcoin balloon. And the peaceful scenario is one where that transition happens sort of gently, slowly, gradually, and instead of a large number of people in the world being caught off guard by sort of the entirety of the current monetary paradigm sort of blowing apart, you have a relatively sizable chunk of them already in the Bitcoin system or in the cryptocurrency system, and the infrastructure to move from one to another is already sort of very well established. And sort of that movement of air, so to speak, from one balloon to another, it happens gradually, steadily, peacefully, and fiat, instead of exploding, so to speak, it slowly sort of fades into irrelevance instead, right? I don't know how realistic that is. Of course, that is the preferable way. But I think a darker pill, so to speak, is that the very existence of Bitcoin is probably going to end up accelerating a more rapid and sort of explosive collapse of the current monetary system, in my opinion, right? Now, we don't know when that's going to happen, but like I said, I think it's going to happen in the next several decades. But personally, I lean towards sort of a more turbulent scenario.